for us. Father, thank you for your goodness to us. I admit I don't deserve your goodness. From a long line of cosmic traitors and sin-plagued people, and yet you're opening my eyes to understand the scriptures, and so I come today. I pray you help me as a teacher. I pray you help us as a class to discuss this passage well. I pray you give us the grace to try different ideas, but then accept the one that you intend. I thank you for the provision. I thank you that grace understood works grace toward other people, and I pray that you would do that in our lives. I pray that you would make us people of prayer. I pray that you would help us be under your word and not over your word. And I pray that you would use something as ordinary as a college class to hasten the day when the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters fill the sea. For we pray all this. The majority of those people are all from the tribe of Judah. And the question is, why is Judah blessed? Because when you compare the life of Judah and the life of Joseph, there is no comparison. Joseph is righteous. Joseph fears God. Joseph, the more his brothers hate him, the more obedient to God he is. And in the issue of sexual morals, you look at the life of Joseph, and he's committed to this life of sexual purity, even when it ends up costing him to go to prison. And in the story, as we've read how all these children are born, Joseph is actually the firstborn child of Rachel. And if Leah had not pretended to be her sister and then connived at her father's direction, but connived her way into making Jacob polygamous, if that had never happened, then Joseph would be the firstborn. Joseph would be the one who was blessed. And yet in the story, Joseph seems to give up that blessing, and Judah takes his place. And so, as intelligent readers of the story, we need to ask why. Is there something in Judah that made him more able to be blessed by God, or is the story inviting us to see that no, Judah is receiving grace when he should be massively punished? And the side that I'm coming down in these lectures is that it's God's grace. This same way that Noah was saved by grace and then became a righteous man, and Abraham was saved by grace and then became a righteous man, I want to make the argument that Judah was saved by grace, not because of anything inherent in Judah. And then Joseph, in fact, begins to make him a righteous person. But I want you to be a Berean. I want you to see if you can come up with a better explanation than that. The Bible is meant to be wrestled with. It's meant to be read. It's meant to be compared, one section with the other. And so that's what I want us to do today. And so I want to make a case that there's a comparison contrast in the lives of Judah and Joseph. And we see in chapters 37 and 39 that Joseph loves his father. Joseph is obedient. When his other brothers are wicked, he tells his father of their wickedness. And that's not Joseph being immature or anything. He's just being a righteous person. When people do evil, you confront evil. And it was the duty of the father Jacob to discipline the sons. And so Joseph is saying, look, this is what they're doing. And we see when he is righteous and lives righteous like that, and when his father loves him because he's living this righteous life, his brothers hate him. In fact, hate him so much they want to kill him. And we've seen that that pattern has already existed in Scripture with Cain and Abel. Abel comes with the offering. He's doing the offering the way God asked, the way God had shown his parents to do it. He's coming as the nothing, emptiness, vanity, but he's saying, look, you want me to worship you this way? I'm going to worship this way. I need God to be good. Blessed are the spiritually bankrupt, for they own God's heavenly kingdom. Matthew 5:3. And the more righteous Abel was, and the more righteous Joseph was, the more hated they are. And so Joseph ends up being thrown in prison, and he believes God, and God is faithful to him. And then before that, he is sexually pure when this woman hounds him every day, begging him, sleep with me, sleep with me. He says, no, how can I sin against God and do this wicked thing? And so we see that Joseph, if you're looking for the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent, clearly Joseph is this seed of the woman. He's following God. He's fearing God. He's believing God. He's trusting God. And on the other side is his brother, and in particular his wicked brother Judah. And so if you see right in the middle of this story of Joseph's faith in God and how that faith works itself out into a life of sexual purity, even when it cost him being falsely accused of rape and being thrown into prison, he's still righteous, he's still believing God, he's still showing other people grace. And in the middle of that, we have this incredibly sexually sinful, hypocritical person, Judah. And so the text is inviting us to contrast their two lives. And that's what we're going to look at today. And the purpose of this is to draw our minds to the Christocentric meta-narrative, to the one righteous Son, who the more righteous he is, the more sinful people hate him and ultimately kill him. And we're going to see that ultimately the most sexually pure person in this story is Jesus. And we're going to see that there's a parallel between what Judah does to Joseph and what all the Jewish people do to Jesus. And this contrast between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, we see it over and over in Scripture. And so Cain, his parents thought he was the seed of the woman, but he wasn't. He was the seed of the serpent. In fact, the Bible is telling us we were all the seed of the serpent until grace changes who we are. And so there's a comparison between Cain and Abel. There's a comparison between Esau and Jacob. And notice that in the middle of this, Esau wants to kill his brother, just like Cain actually does kill his brother. And with Joseph, when Joseph righteously brings a bad report, what do the brothers want to do? They say, let's kill him. There's a comparison here between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, and somehow redemption is related to the seed of the woman. And so how are we to understand these stories? Notice when we come to Joseph and his brothers, when his father sends Joseph to look for his brothers, this is what it says happened. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. That is the fact that we're all the natural offspring of Adam. It means when true righteousness comes into our lives, the natural response to that is going to be shame, because a righteous person's life makes us feel ashamed. And so the kind of fleshly result is what it always is. Let's get rid of that righteous person. So when he came near, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one, here comes this dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits. And then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Now notice how these sins are recapitulating the previous sins of ancestors. That is, we're going to kill him, and then we're going to lie to cover up. It's exactly what Cain did. It's exactly what Adam did, trying to cover up his sin. And notice that they're using clothes to deceive. And who else used clothes to deceive? Well, that's what their father did when he dressed up in the clothes of his brother. That contrasts the obedience of Joseph. His father wants him to do something. He went into his father. He said, my father. He said, here I am. This is Jacob's sin. And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. And so the father is, quite frankly, naturally, fleshly, physically, the father is a liar who's willing to bring in God in terms of their lie. And then we see the offspring, the natural born fallen offspring, they're willing to lie as well. So they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. God had shown the sacrifice of the animal, and now they're using religion to cover up the hypocrisy of what they're doing. They sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, we found this. Please identify whether it's your son's robe or not. And they were more than willing to let their father go into the bitterest of weeping and mourning to cover up the fact that they had sold their righteous brother into slavery. The father's crying his eyes out. The brothers could care less because they've gotten money for doing it, and they've gotten rid of the person who made them feel bad about themselves. Joseph is 17 years old when this happens. And we know that because in the beginning of the Toledoth, it brings that out, that he's 17 years old when this happens. Ultimately, something's going to happen when he's 30 years old, and then again when he's 37 years old. But now he's 17 years old, and he's about to go in to 20 years of slavery and misery. The more he obeys God, the worse it is for him. When the Midianite traitors pass by, and the Midianite people are descendants of Abraham through his third wife, Keturah, they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And a shekel is about 2 days' wage in the Old Testament. And if you think a day's wage is $150, they're selling him for 20 of those, so it's about $6,000 they sell him for. And the reason they picked that price is because when God would later codify, if you made a vow, how much money you were supposed to pay, if you were under 20 years old, which Joseph would be at 17, then you value male at 20 shekels. So this law that was later codified, that kind of told you what people would worth if they made vows, they're selling him for the price 20 shekels, about 6,000. And the person who came up with that idea to do that was Judah. The brothers say, let's kill him. And Judah says, well, I would agree with that, but we won't make any money if we just kill him. So why don't we sell him? We'll sell him. And so they sell him for the money and divide it up among themselves. Marc Chagall, my favorite painter, was a Russian-born Jew who painted in Paris. He lived in the 20th century. He brings a Jewish sensibility to many of the Old Testament stories, and there are times where he will even connect those stories for Christians. He wasn't above knowing how to make money, and he realized that oftentimes Jewish stories connect well with Christian stories. And I wonder if he's doing that here, having his brothers strip him naked and then throwing him in the pit and selling him for money. And if we could read the original languages of Scripture, we would realize that this connection between Judah selling Joseph and Jesus is much greater, because in the English text the word is Judah, and if we look at how that word is translated into Greek, you can see it's this word. And if we do a search on this word in the Greek Bible, this is what we're going to find. And notice in our English Bibles it's translated Judas, mimicking the Greek version, but you can see that that's the same exact word. Judas and Judah are the same exact word in the Bible. And if you think about that, you realize that Judah, will say, sold Jesus for 30 shekels of silver. And you say, well, why 30? Why not, if you're making the comparison, why not sell him for 20? That's what Joseph. Well, there's a reason. There's an elegant, plot-symmetrical, meta-narratival, Christocentric revelation from God. All these stories connect. And if we ask why 30 shekels, there's a reason it's 30, not 20. And the reason is because the Jewish leaders were meaning to insult Jesus. We know that Jesus is somewhere over 30 years old, because Luke tells us he was 30 years old when he was baptized. So Joseph was 17, Jesus was 30. And this is what that same passage in Leviticus says. If somebody makes a vow and you're going to pay that vow, then this is kind of how it spells out in the chart. If the person is a female, the valuation will be 30 shekels. If you make a vow and you're a man and you're over 20, that same chart says the valuation is 50 shekels. So the priests aren't giving Judas, or Judah, we'll say, the price of what a man 30 years old was worth. They're giving him the price of a woman. And you might say, if somebody listened to this lecture and said, well, isn't that just, part of this anti-woman propaganda in the Bible, this devaluation of women? And I don't think so. I think it's exactly the opposite. Here's why. 30 shekels is also the price of a slave, male or female. If they're killed, you could offer this money, and the valuation is 30 shekels. And so when the priests offer Judah, or Judas, however we want to call him, 30 shekels, they're saying, we don't know if Jesus is really a man or not. And we don't know if he's free or not. So we're not going to give you the rate that a man, a free man, but we'll give you the price of a woman or a slave. Well, isn't Jesus' death the ransom for one glorious enslaved woman, the church? And they meant it as a mockery of Jesus. And perhaps those values were tied in with the agrarian culture and the amount of physical labor that could be done. I don't know. I don't know why the numbers are different. But I do know that they're meaning that number as an insult to Jesus. And the God-man is saying, no, I'm going to give my life to rescue not a corporate man. I'm not giving my life to rescue a corporate Adam. I'm giving my life to rescue a corporate Eve, an enslaved woman that the world is trampling on, and I am choosing to redeem and make the empress of the cosmos. That's as far away from anti-woman, the God, the infinite, eternal creator of heaven and earth, the one who stands outside of time, incarnating and then taking the penalty, and then building a new Eve, and so winning and wooing her heart that she becomes untemptable by evil. If you can take that story and make it somehow anti-woman, good luck, but it seems to me a very childish way to read the story. This is as pro-woman as it can possibly get, but we have to read the text with the grain, not against it. It's not part of an anti-woman bias. It's rather part of a Christocentric meta-narrative unity. You meant it for evil. God meant it for good. They meant it as an insult. God meant it as meta-narratival elegance. We see, but before we go on there, any follow-up questions or comments or observations? I know in a big class like this, it's not really conducive to two-way dialogue. I always feel bad for lecturing so much and not talking. JP. Yeah, Reuben wants to save Joseph but he can't. And JP, do you know why he can't? Do you know why Reuben lost his status as firstborn son? He lost his status as firstborn son because he slept with his father's mistress. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, would you think? Yeah. Let me ask a question. Is it good for dad to have a mistress? Okay. And she's so neglected. I mean, people have needs, and he's neglecting her. And Reuben, and remember, who's the one who brought the mandrakes to mom? Reuben. And what are mandrakes? I don't know what they are, but in Hebrew they're called love apples. Dudaim or Dodaim, and it's that same exact root in Song of Solomon that everybody gets the tattoo of. I'm my beloved and my beloved is mine. Same exact root there. And so, just sometime you're bored, go to Google and type in mandrakes, and you're gonna think, wow, this is pretty weird. I mean, the whole idea that the plants scream, and if you hear the scream, you'll go insane, and so they use dogs to harvest them. It's like, what? It's like, okay, I don't know what these are, but you start using words like narcotic and aphrodisiac, and like, why in the world would Reuben bring that to his mom, and then all of a sudden he's sleeping with his dad's mistress? Okay, he wants to redeem, but he can't because everybody knows his sin. In other words, you need a redeemer who not only wants to redeem, but who has a righteous life. I know somebody like that in this story. There's a parallel between the lives of Judah and the lives of Joseph in this idea of sexual purity and sexual impurity. And so what we want to do is just take a few minutes, and the purpose of this story is to say to all of us, God knows how to save sexual sinners. So if you've ever had the idea, oh, I'm just too bad for God to save, this story is good news because Judah's name is over one of the gates in heaven, right? So you die and you go in. One of those gates is named Reuben. Another one of those gates is named Judah. God knows how to redeem sexually broken people. And let's look at Judah's sexual brokenness. It came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. And you know how in the Bible, whenever we come to a word that ends in ite, we always skip it? Or, I don't know, am I speaking just for myself, or can I get a witness? Like, do you have your blah, 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 blah? I don't know. Do you do that, or is it just wicked me? Okay. It's wrong to do that because any information is being given to us from a communicative God. And if we took time to look up Adulamites, we would realize that he's a Canaanite. Are Canaanites good people or bad people in the story? They're bad people. In fact, they're the ones who are going to get driven out of the earthly representation of the Garden of Eden. And so there was this guy, and he was a Canaanite. Do you imagine that guy was sexually pure or sexually impure? I mean, his religious orientation was to do that whole fertility cult thing. He's a Canaanite. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. And for some reason, I think the Hebrew word there is satisfaction. I may be wrong on that, but it says he took her and went into her. This is, I don't know, is this marriage? Is this rape? I can't tell reading the original language. But it does say that she conceived and bore a son, and he named his son Here's the wicked part of this story. This guy's name is and the texts tell us was raw in God's eyes. Remember that thing that happened with the Noah story? It's happening in this story too. Was wicked in God's eyes. Judah is wicked. Judah is doing these wicked things. He has a son who's so wicked that God kills him. Now, when I read this story, I see a lot of people that God doesn't kill who do really wicked things. It says this guy was so wicked, God killed him. Judah ends up marrying the daughter of Shua. He has 3 sons. This guy is so wicked that God kills him. And then Judah, knowing that God wanted this thing called levirate marriage, where if a son dies childless, the widowed wife is married to the brother. I don't really know what that's about, why God did that. God doesn't tell us why he did that. But Judah gives this woman to Onan, and instead of giving her a child, he would just go in and have sex with her and then make sure that she would never get a child out of that process. So he's just sleeping with her over and over. God wanted her to have a child, and this guy was using that provision from God, and so it says God killed this guy. And Judah looks at this guy and looks at this guy, and the conclusion Judah draws is, man, she must be really wicked because she's killing my righteous boys. Really? Maybe the fact that you married a Canaanite and, God says, but Judah is so blinded to his own sin that he thinks it's her. And so he says, I know I should give Sheila to her, but man, she is so wicked. If I do that, she's going to kill all my boys. My boys are good boys. And so he sends this girl back home. And the girl kind of figures it out. Hey, he has no intent of giving me to Sheila, and I want to have a child. Have you heard that narrative in the story? Is there somebody else, a girl in the story who wants to have a child and like there are no men? Isn't this Lot's daughters all over again? And so she says, this is what I'll do. I know what Judah's like. I'll dress up like a religious prostitute and I'll go sit near the place I know he'll walk by. And she says, I know he'll sleep with me if I do that. Now, let me just ask you a question about that. Was that just a lucky guess, or did she have reason to believe that this plan might work? Because I think this story may be telling us that Tamar knew what Judah was like. And she said, if he's not going to give me Sheila, I know if I'm dressed up like a religious prostitute, he'll sleep with me. And so that's what happened. God had said, don't intermarry with Canaanites. Don't give your daughters to their sons. Don't take their daughters for your sons, for they would turn your sons away from fall. Judah had done that. Is Judah guilty or innocent? He is guilty. He has violated this law. The natural result that happens is the wrath of the Lord will be kindled, and he will destroy you quickly. Does that apply to Judah, or does it not apply to Judah? He had done that. So this is Tamar, and Tamar's name means date palm, but I think that's because date palms are sweet, so I think her name really is Sweetie, or something like that, or Sweet Wine, or something. She conceived again and bore a son. She called his name Onan, yet again she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezev, which I think means the lie. That's interesting, when she bore him. Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Sweetie. But Judah's firstborn, was raw in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law. Raise up offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, so whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up. For he feared that he would die like his brother. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, do you think there's like irony there, Bathshua and Bathsheba? I don't know. He went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend here, the Adulamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance of Enaim, the double-walled city, which is on the road to Timnah, for she saw that Shelah was grown up and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you. This is the same idiom of Judah and Bathshua. And she said, what will you give that you may come into me? And he answered, I'll send you a goat from the flock. She said, well, if you give me a pledge before you send it. And she said, what pledge do you want? She said, well, how about your ring, your wallet, and your belt? So he gave them to her. He went into her, and she conceived. Does that seem like a weird story to you? Isn't that kind of a creepy old man story a little bit? Isn't it violation of thou shalt not commit adultery? Is God saving Judah because he's good? Or is God saving Judah and making him good? Oh, and by the way, if you didn't know, if you ever had the temptation, don't uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. It's just kind of a good life principle there. If your son marries a woman, don't sleep with that woman. Just kind of, You might not have known that, right? Sorry. It's an abomination if you do that. Then she arose and went away, taking off her veil, put her garments of widowhood. Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adulamites to take back the pledge, and he asked the men of the place, where is the cult prostitute? So this isn't just, Richard Gere and Julia Roberts' Pretty Woman. This is like a Canaanite fertility cult prostitute. She dressed up like a Canaanite fertility cult prostitute. And they said, there isn't a Canaanite fertility cult prostitute here. So, this is like the normal word, just kind of your generic. This is the word holy, like holy of holies. So this is a woman who is using prostitution to worship a god. He's not just sleeping with a prostitute. He's sleeping with a fertility cult prostitute. Jesus said, let her keep it. We'll be laughed at. I sent the goat. I'm an honest guy. I said I'd give a goat. I sent the goat. 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter Tamar, and in Hebrew it says has been a whore. That's what it literally says. And moreover, she's conceived by her whoredom. And Judah says, kill her. Matter of fact, you stone immoral whores. But we just can't stone her. We got to burn her, because God reveals that if you're a religious person, you just can't stone. You gotta burn them. And we're religious. I mean, have you not been to my Sunday school class? I tell people about God all the time. We can't just stone her because I'm a religious person. We got to make an example of that wicked woman. Okay, help me with that. Don't you want to say to Judah, you remember when you went to Las Vegas, and you remember but Judah is living this double life of, I'm a religious person, and a judgmental life. She's been a whore. We've got to kill her. She was being brought out. She sent word, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. She says, please, does this ring, wallet, and belt look familiar to you? And he says, she's more righteous than I am. And you want to say, the bar might not be too high there, really. I mean, is God saving Judah because he's good? And I think this story is inviting us to say no. God is saving him and making him good. And if that's the right way to read this story, isn't Judah's story all of our stories? Isn't, if God put the glaring spotlight on any of our lives, that same religious hypocrisy that we see in his life and in David's life and isn't it in our lives too? And isn't the same brokenness there? And isn't the same little compromises there? And yet God knows how to save broken people. And not only broken people, but he's blessing broken people. And we see that Joseph is righteous, but Judah is blessed. And the meta-narrative is Jesus is righteous and you and I are blessed. God knows how to save broken people. There's nobody who can say, I'm just too bad. I'm too bad. Listen, God knows how to get bad people to heaven. And that's what Jesus came to do. Jesus is the ultimate Joseph. All right, that's what I have for you. I will see you on Wednesday.